Okay, Chesed Aleph. Why is my want to keep going through this page here? The fourth line, third line, fourth line. So the Mishnah said that if you shouldn't shecht on Yantif, but if you shechted on Yantif, what's machlokas? Beis Shammai holds you can. Beis Hillel says you shouldn't. Beis Hillel says you shouldn't shecht unless you had prepared dirt. But they agree that if you did shecht, you can. So we said last week you have the spade already in the ground before Yantif. There's a book, Gemara for you over there at the table. Yeah. Okay. Because dirt from dust from the oven is already prepared. So what that means is that when you burn wood in an oven, so after it burned, it turns to ash. So that ash is considered ready to be used. So the Gemara says, who mentioned the ash of an oven that the Gemara suddenly says that the ash of the oven is always considered ready, and it's not muktzah. Muchan, it's the opposite, it's prepared, it's the opposite of muktzah. So Amarabba Hachikam, Rabba says this is what the Mishnah means. Ve'efer kiran muchan hu. Not sheh. It's not that if you have the spade in the ground, you can use that dirt because a fakir is muchan. No, you could use the with the spade, and we mentioned last time that the spade is in the ground before yantif. And another halacha, a fakir is muchan. The ash that's from the stove, from the oven, is considered ready. It's not considered muktzah. Oh, meaning if you shechted a bird or a chaya on yantif for your yantif meal, you could take that ash and cover the blood with it for the mitzvah of Kisui hadam, of covering the blood when you shecht a bird or a chaya like a deer. Rav Yehuda Amarav, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Lo shanu elo shehusok mir of Yom Tov. This is only true if you cleared the ash out of from the stove from before yantif. Aval husak b'yom tov asr. But if it became ash on yantif, you're not allowed to use it because it wasn't ash when yantif started. So it's muktzah. The imroi litzos both beitza mutter. But if it's hot enough that you could roast an egg on it, you're allowed to use it because it seems even if it was made on yantif, because that's people use it for that purpose. And oh no, so Rashi says, so if it's from before Yantif, it's before Yantif. And if it happened on Yantif, the wood that you made that you had prepared before Yantif to put into your oven was prepared for cooking purposes. And now that it turned to ash, you're still using this ash for cooking purposes. For, instead of making a hard-boiled egg by boiling it in water, you cover it in these hot ashes, and then it becomes a hard roasted egg. No, you don't have to, but if it would be hot enough, okay, before Shlema, then it's so. But if it's hot enough, so then it's not muktzah. Even if it became ash on Yom Tov, but because you had the wood prepared to put into your oven to cook on Yom Tov, and now that it's still hot enough to cook an egg with it, which is something that doesn't need that much heat, but it needs more heat than nothing. So then you're allowed to use that ash, even though it became ash on Yom Tov. Tanin Amihacha, we have a brisa like that. Tanin Amihacha, we have a brisa like this. Kisha Amru Efer Kira Muchanhu, when Chazal said that the ashes of the oven are considered ready for use on Yom Tov and they're not muktzah, lo amru shel husak me'er Yom Tov. That's only if they were already ash before Yom Tov. Aval husak b'Yom Tov aser, but if they became ash on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to use it because it's considered, it wasn't in this state before Yom Tov, so it's probably no lot. The imroi litzos beitza motor. But if you're able to roast an egg on it because it's hot, you're allowed to use it. Okay. You're my share assistant. So if you brought dirt or dust or whatever into your into your garden or into your storage area, well, chorva really means it's not fit for habitation right now. It's in state of ruins. This building that's in a state of ruin, but it means that you brought it into your yard of some sort, mutal chasas, but then you're allowed to. So this isn't talking about ash from uh this isn't talking about ash from the stove, but you brought in other dirt. So it's loose already. Maybe it was ash already, or maybe it's just dirt, but it's not stuck in the ground, and you brought it into your possession. So from the fact that you brought it into your yard, it's considered prepared. It's not moksa. Mochel chasas, what you're allowed to cover with it on yantif, it's not considered moksa. Va'am Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda also says, "Machnes adam lo kupaso afar va'osubal kol charcha." You could fill in a whole basket with dirt before yantif, and you could use it for whatever you might need it for. Now, in some houses, I guess maybe you spill. I don't know in those days how much they spilled, but I guess in those days, if you spilled and your floor was dirt, you didn't want to step in the mud puddle, so you might put more on top of it. Abba. Yes. Darish Marzutra Mishmei Rav Zutra Rabba. Marzutra made a drasha in the name of the great Marzutra. In the name of the great Marzutra, Vahushi Yichelo Karen Zavis. But that says when you put it in a corner, this basket of dirt, meaning it shows that you want to use it for something. If you just put it on your floor, you're kind of just you lost the uniqueness of having it ready for whatever need is doing. But for the fact that you put it aside, it means you have it ready for whatever you might need it for. Let me just turn it a little softer. Okay. I didn't even press anything yet. Right. And Rashi points out that this Bryce and this limud is talking about that it's not packed earth, it's loose earth, as we mentioned last time, because if you would have, it would be clumpy and you would have to unclump it to cover, then that's tolda. What is it? Tolda. It's because that would be a tolda of grinding. For making something from a bigger thing into a smaller thing is a tolda of the malacha of grinding. Meisvei, so they asked on this learning from a Mishnah. Koi, so Pinchas Eisenbach calls it a kvi, but most things that I've said, the nakudos are a koi. Now a koi, it says in a note here somewhere that it might be a buffalo. In note 10, Eretz Scroll says some identify it as a buffalo. Now, if it's in the Ramah and the Gra and the Tiferes Yisrael, I don't think they mean an American bison. Now, yeah, but the question is it considered a domestic animal or a wild animal? Now, most of the real bison are, well, they're probably chayos, except. So the difference is wild, right? There's other type of buffalo that are more indigenous to Asia, and those are called buffalo or water buffalo, and they're a different species. So if our article is correct, and I didn't look into this about buffalo, I would think that, I don't know if it would. It's unlikely that they were talking about American bison, and it's not so likely they're talking about Asian bison, a buffalo, but they're more likely that they would have reports of it in that time. Well, I would doubt in the time of the Ramah, which was by 1600. I doubt they would have had reports about American bison were. So they certainly were reports about Asian water buffalo or whatever. So that's an important thing to know. When it says buffalo, what it means. It probably does not mean American bison, but I'm not positive about that. So koi, so it's an animal that the Chachamim say it's a safek. We don't know if it's a behema, domestic animal. We don't know if it's a chay. Now, if it's a behema, then you wouldn't have to cover its blood when you shecht it. If it's a chaya, you would have to. Because it's a safek, you would cover it as a safek, and let's say because it's a safek, you would not make a bracha on. Another difference between a behema and a chaya would be certain fats. Certain fats are usher, they're called chaylev. They're forbidden fats. So if it's a behema, you're not allowed to eat those fats. And if it's a chaya, you would be allowed to eat those fats. So that's just what's the halachic differences if it's a chaya or a behema. We paskin that a koi is a safek. We have to treat it with all the stringencies of both. So a behema is a domesticated, like a cow, a sheep, a goat. And a chaya is a wild. So a deer is wild. This koi is a safek. I guess it would be worthwhile for me to ask people hechsher that gives hechsher on bison if they consider it behema or now a lot of the ones that they have now. I mean, so some bison or what we call bison, some have mixed DNA with cows. And I think a lot of the stuff that they have for meat are well, I would think they are. And there are some, and I don't know if people use it for meat or not. They're like the ones at Fermilab that I saw during the summer. They have no cow DNA in them. So I don't know if that's a difference also. But I don't think that they would shecht the completely well, I don't think that's the way they would produce it, but I should ask someone that gives a hechsher to it, which it is, and if they treat it as a chaya or a behema or a safek. I need to make it softer. If you need it, then you have to go a little bit further away from me. So koi ain't shochno so b'yamtov. You're not allowed to shecht it on yamtov. Im shachta in b'chatzin estam. And if you did shecht it, you're not allowed to cover the blood. So because it's not certainty that you need to cover it because it's only considered a chaya, a wild animal, as a safek, and so we don't have a mitzvah. There's no absolute mitzvah to cover it. It's only a safek. It's a doubt if it's really a chaya or cover it. So because of that, we don't cover it on yantiv. So v'imi salchasek Rav Yehuda. And if Rav Yehuda's halacha is correct, that if you brought in a pile of dirt or a basket of dirt and kept it in the corner, so you know it's when you're turning it down, that's what happened. That's why it keeps turning louder. Let's flip it this way. Then it won't have that problem. Okay, hold it. Please hold it. Please hold it's gonna fall. So let us say that you're able to cover it because you had dirt that you brought in for any potential use before Yantif. So, tamech, according to you, for Kira Obedeker notes. Why do you have to ask if Rabbi Yehuda is correct? Rabbi Yehuda is correct. Let him cover it with that dirt. The Mishnah already said if you have a spade that's already stuck in the dirt, or you have ash from your oven, you cover it with that. So why don't you? So according to you, that would contradict this Mishnah. So obviously it wouldn't contradict this Mishnah. So it must mean that Ella delay slay. So we have to hit the case where you don't have any ash from your oven. Your oven, I don't know, you don't have an oven. Or you did not stick a spade into the ground before Yantif, so you don't have. Similarly, you didn't bring a basket full of dirt and pile it in and put it in this in a specific place in your house in case you need it for Yantif. The reason is you can't cover it because you don't have anything to cover it with. So here's a case where you don't have any dirt prepared or any oven ashes or a spade in the ground. So ihafi, but if that's so, when you don't have any, my area is suffix. Why did the Mishnah point out that this is an animal where it's a suffix if you have to cover the blood? Filu vada namilo, even if it was for sure a bird or for sure a chaya, and you didn't have any dirt. If you don't have any dirt, you didn't put a spade in the ground, you can't cover it. So it would apply even when you had a vadai, an undoubted, a verified case where you had to cover it. You don't have dirt, can't cover it. So the Gemara says, "Lomi ba'ikamer." The Mishnah's sometimes the Mishnah works to something loma ba'ya. It's not just this case, but even in that other case. So lo mibayavada de lo lishchot. We doesn't need to tell us. It goes without saying that if it's certainly a chaya, you shouldn't shech that on yantif, because if you shech the chaya, you have to cover it, and you don't have any dirt, so you shouldn't put yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. Avol seif safek emo mishum yantif lishchot v'lo chasei. But if you have an animal that's a koi, it's only a doubt if you're obligated to cover the blood. So I might say, because of the mitzvah of Simchas Yantif, to be happy on Yantif with the fresh meat, you could shacht it and not cover the blood. It's not such a big deal, but not covering the blood because it's only a suffix. Kamash Malan, it's come to teach you that still you need to cover the blood, and because you don't have dirt, you cannot cover the blood. You can't, because you don't have dirt to cover the blood with, you cannot shacht it on Yom Tov. So then they go return to Chasam and Beis. But the end of that Mishnah says, "V'im shachto ein mechasen es damo." If you did shacht it on Yantif, you don't cover the blood. Mechlal the reisha b'isle askina. That makes it sound like the first case is where you did have something to cover it. V'im shachto ein mechasen es damo. You don't cover it. Now, if you didn't have anything to cover with, why does it have to tell us you don't cover it? You don't have anything to cover with. So that is a problem with this explanation of the Brisa. So El Amar Rabba, so Rabba gives a different explanation. A for Kiramuchan, so meaning an explanation back on our Mishnah. The whole discussion started from our Mishnah. The last few words of the Mishnah says Sha'e for Kiramuchanu, and we said we were talking about having a spade stuck in your ground already. So who's talking about ashes from the oven? So the first answer, Rav. Rabba said it was ve'e for kira. If you had ashes from the oven. But then we asked from this case about koi, and so now we think that's not a good explanation. It's a separate clause. Ve'e for, it's not a reason because a for kira. So El Amar Rabba gives a new shot in the Mishnah. A for kira muchen levada ve'in muchen l'safek. But it doesn't seem to be a new explanation for our Mishnah, but it seems to be an explanation about the ashes in regard to the Mishnah about a kohen. And so he says that the ashes of your stove is considered prepared before Yantif for a vadai when you have a definite obligation to cover it, to cover blood that you shot, meaning from a deer or from an oaf. From a bird, but it's not considered prepared for something that's only a suffix. In regard to a shachting a koi, that's only a suffix if you have to cover the blood. This ash is considered muktzah. It was not prepared before yantif. So now the Gemara is going to talk about some cases where we have something that's a suffix versus a vadai. Oh, it's the light on. Oh, you put the light on. Don't say it. Yeah. Thank you. The suffix my time low. So why wouldn't it be considered prepared for a case where you only had a doubt if you have to cover it? Why can't you cover it? To ka'avid guma. Is it because you make a hole? Vade nami ka'avid guma. When a case where there's a definite obligation. Like when it's for sure a bird, you're shechting a chicken or a duck or a deer, and you definitely have to cover the blood. So didn't we discuss last time? Isn't there a problem, a malacha of making a hole? Vade nami covered gufa. In that case, you're also making a hole. El Rababa. So we have to explain it with the pshat of Rabbi, which we saw last time. And Rabbi said that even though to make a hole is tolda of binyan, of building, but that's only if you need the hole for something. Let's say I need the hole to put a beam in there to support something. So then the hole is a constructive purpose. But Rabbi Abba says if you make the hole and you don't need the hole itself, but you just need some dirt, so you make a hole, it's not a malacha. That's a malacha she'ena gufa. That's a malacha act which is not needed for the act itself. It's not that you need the hole; you just need the dirt. So that's not a malacha according to Rabbi Abba. So it's not. So the problem of making a hole is not a problem. So here we could also say like Rabbi Abba. So there's no problem of making a hole by scooping out some of your ashes to cover up the koi blood when you shech the koi for Yantif. So the Gemara says, "Alasafik my time dilma avid ksisha." So why is it a problem in the case of a suffix behema, suffix chaya for this koi? Why can't you use? Why do we say that the ashes are not from the oven are not considered prepared before Yantif for it? Because maybe you are going to crumble them up. So the Gemara says that's not a good answer because vade nami nigzer mishum ksisha. If you'd have to crumble it because it was clumpy, that would be a problem, even if you were shechting, if you were covering the blood of a bird, of a chicken, that you definitely have a chiyuv midirai. There's no suffix. It's definite that you have to cover its blood. So vada ki kavid ksisha asti aseh v'dachi los aseh. So the Gemara says, well, in a case where you definitely need to cover it, when you would crumble up the ashes, the aseh, the mitzvah aseh, the positive commandment of covering the blood, pushes off the negative commandment of not doing malacha on Yom Tov. So there's a general principle in halacha, aseh docha los aseh. So then choose a different one. So when there's a for sure mitzvah to cover the blood, that for sure mitzvah say of covering the blood pushes off the los say of not doing malacha on Yom Tov. But when you're covering the blood of a koi, there's no mitzvah. It's only a suffix if it's a chaya. So therefore, we cannot have there's no mitzvah that's positive mitzvah that's pushing off the negative avera of not doing malacha on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, "Aimer damrinan asay, asi asay v'daches los asay." When do we say that a mitzvah asay, a positive commandment, pushes off a negative commandment? That's kagon mila b'tzaras, inami sudden b'tzitzis. That's if, let's say, someone has a tzaras spot on the foreskin, and there's an avera. Don't worry about that. There's an avera that you're not allowed to cut off a tzaras spot to try to avoid getting tzaras. So if by doing the mitzvah of bris milah, you definitely are going to violate the avera, or a sudden literally means sheet, but in this case it means a linen garment, and tzitzis strings are made out of wool. So even though we're not allowed to have shatnez, for tzitzis you're allowed to have wool strings in a linen baguette. Now I don't think that applies nowadays because most Rishonim hold that applies when there's tchelas and you have a full mitzvah of tzitzis. And even though some people think they know what the tchelas is nowadays, the Beis Halevi's opinion was that's something that depends on Masorah, and once the Masorah was lost, nothing can restart the Masorah unless someone who had the Masorah can give it to us. So for example, Eliyahu Navi, when he comes, he'll say, yes, this is the real tchelas, you could use it. Or he'll say, no, that's not the real tchelas, this is how you use the real tchelas. But some people thinking that they found the real thing, according to the Beis Halevi, we don't have tchelas. So nowadays, you should not put wool tzitzis on a linen baguette. But when we have real tchelas, that's something that's mutter. So the mitzvah saseh of tzitzis overrides the negative commandment of not mixing wool and linen. At the very moment where you're doing, no, it says you're uprooting the negative commandment by meaning you're cutting off the taras spot, or you're putting the kalayim, the tzemer upishtim yachtav, you're fulfilling the asay. At the same moment, you're doing both. But at this time, when you're violating when you're crumbling the earth, or we're talking about crumbling the earth, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah at the very same moment. There's a small time difference between when you crumble it and when the blood gets covered and the fulfillment of the mitzvah saseh takes place. So the Gemara does not like to say that there's an asay docholos asay for that the mitzvah of covering the blood pushes off the los asay of not doing malach on yantiv. So the Gemara says, "Hello, kasha." That's not a question. The bahadi dekasi comes lachase. So no, we're taking a case where you crush it and it covers the blood immediately. So yom tov asay v'los asehu. But at the end of the day, our question is still a good question. Let the mitzvah. But there was a problem with the premise of what we asked. We said let the mitzvah of vadai, the vadai mitzvah of covering the blood of a chaya could push off the los asay of yom tov. However, yeah, Mike. What? Which mitzvah? Oh, the vadai. Vadai means the certain, the definite mitzvah. So if I shecht a bird, a turkey, a duck, a chicken, the halacha is you have to cover the blood that came out when you shechted it with dirt. Or if you shecht a wild animal like a deer, a kosher animal like a deer, you have to cover its blood. So that's a vadai. It's a definite. If you shecht a domesticated animal, a goat, a sheep, a cow, you do not have to cover its blood. But then there's a species called koi in Hebrew, and a koi is halachically doubtful status. We're not sure if it's a domesticated animal or a wild animal. So because of that, we treat it as a doubt. So if you shech the koi, you do have to cover its blood, but you wouldn't make a bracha because we don't know for sure that it's like a deer. Maybe it's really like a sheep, that it's a domesticated animal. So we're saying what we're talking about right now is that on yantif, you're allowed to shecht an animal so you have fresh meat for your yantif meal. But if you would shecht this koi, you're not allowed to shecht the koi on yantif because you wouldn't be allowed to cover its blood. Because when you're allowed to cover the blood of a bird or of a deer, a wild animal that you shecht on yantif, that's only when you have a for sure obligation to cover it because it's definitely a bird or definitely a wild animal. But because this animal is a doubt, it's a halachic doubt that it's a wild animal, you're not allowed to cover the dirt out of a doubt on yantif. So therefore, you're not allowed to shecht it. And if you shecht it, you're not allowed to cover the blood. That's what it means. So vadai means it's certainly a chaya, certainly an animal that's required that whose blood is required to be covered after being slaughtered. Okay, does that make more sense? But sof yom tov asay v'los asehu ve'en asay dochel asay v'los eno doches los asay v'asay. So yantif, though, it's not only a negative commandment that you're not allowed to do malacha. There's a positive commandment of resting on yom tov. So there's two mitzvahs. There's a positive commandment to rest on yom tov, which means refrain from malacha, and then there's a los asay that you're not allowed to do malacha. So the principle is a positive commandment can only push off a negative commandment, but it's not strong enough to push out a negative commandment with a positive commandment. So the obligation, even if you shech the deer on Shabbos, on Yantif, or a chicken on Yantif, and there's a definite command of Kisui hadam to cover the blood, but Yom Tov itself is an asay and a los asay. Well, we answered that in regard to that, but so the So Yom Tov has an assay to refrain from malacha, and Allah says not to do malacha. So the mitzvah of Kisui hadam shouldn't apply. The heter of what's the heter now that you can cover it on Yom Tov. So why does the Mishnah, not our Mishnah, but the Mishnah we quote, talk about that if you shechted a koi on on uh on Yom Tov at the very top line on Chesed Beis, you're not allowed to cover the blood, which implies that if it's a definite, you can cover the blood. We don't have a heter right now. What's the heter to cover the blood? So Ella de Amarava, Ella Amarava. So Rava gives a different explanation. We had Rabba, and then we had no. This is Rabba. The first one was we had Rabba. We had a different explanation from Rabba, and now we have an explanation from Rava. Your intent of having ash of the oven on hand is only when you have a definite avadai situation to use it for, but it's not you. It's not meaning when we say it's not muktzah for a definite reason. But if you only have a suffix reason, a doubtful reason, maybe I need it, maybe I don't, that's not considered, it's considered muktzah for that. It wasn't prepared before Yontif for that. La'az Rava l'tameh, and this opinion of Rava is seen in another case also. It literally means Rava follows his reasoning. But it's saying that Rava is consistent because we have a different case where he uses the same logic. The Amar Rava, because Rava says, so let's say you have a kid and they didn't have good diapers in those days, or your kid figured out how to take off the diaper. And what if they make a dirty, instead of making a dirty diaper, they make it on the floor. Now you have something not smelly and not good in your house on your floor. What do you have to do with it? It's kind of muktzah. It's disgusting. There's nothing you would do with it in a positive way on Yantif or on Shabbos. This would be talking about Yantif. So if you brought it to cover up a number two that your kid might make, motel chasas bo dam tzipor. You're allowed to use that dirt to cover the blood of a bird if you shech the bird on Yantif. Dam tzipor, but if you brought blood to cover, you were planning on shechting a chicken for Yantif, you're not allowed to use that dirt to cover what the dirty thing that the kid made, because if you're planning on shechting, that's definite use. You don't know that your kid is going to take off their diaper and then poop on the floor, so that's only a suffix if you're really going to need the dirt to cover. But if you brought it for a for sure reason to cover the blood that you were going to shech, you're not allowed to use it for the suffix reason, which because you don't know that the baby is going to make a poop on the floor that you're going to need to cover. But Nahar Baloi, which was a place, and Rashi quotes from the Gemara in Sanhedrin that it's Rabbi, the son of Baribi. Or Bruchi. Afilu hifnasafar l'chasos botam tzipor mortal l'chasos botsoa. Narbaloi says that even if you brought it for a definite reason to cover the blood of the chicken that you're going to shech, you are allowed to use it to cover the poop, which was only a suffix if a baby was going to make a poop on the floor on Yantif. Amri b'marava, they said in the west, which is Eretz Yisrael. Pligi bar Rav Yossi bar Chama Rav Zera. There was a machlokes between Rav Yossi bar Chama and Rav Zera. The Amri la Rava, and it's just point out that we learned about Rav Zera at the end of Ksuvos, that Rav Zera was in Bavel and he decided to move to Eretz Yisrael, and he fasted a long fast that he should forget the Torah of Bavel, of Chutz La'aretz, so he'll have a clear mind to learn the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. So Rav Zera eventually went to Eretz Yisrael. But this is a quote that we got from Eretz Yisrael. Va'amrila Rava Braid Rav Yosef Bar Chama of Rav Zera. And some say it wasn't Rav Yosef Bar Chama, but it was Rava Braid Rav Yosef Bar Chama and Rav Zera. Chad Amar, one of them said, Koi Hareu Kitsoa. The obligation to cover the blood of a koi that you shech is like covering up the kid's poop. It's a suffix. The hadam, but one says koi enu ketzoa. Koi is not like that. It's considered that even though it itself is a suffix, compared to covering up a poop, it's considered avada. It's not avada. It's not a for sure thing by itself, but you can't compare it to a tzoa. So now the Gemara tries to figure out who said what. Tistayim de Rav Huda Amar Koi Hareu Ketzoa. Let's try to prove that Rava is the one who says that koi is comparable to poop. The Amar Rava, because Rava says Hichnes over l'chasas botzoa, motor l'chasas bot dam tzipor also l'chasas botzoa tistayim. Because Rava says if you brought dirt into your house to cover a poop that might happen, you're allowed to cover a dam tzipor, which is a definite situation. But dam tzipor, if you brought the blood, the dirt in to cover a definite situation, if you shot the bird, you definitely have to cover it. You're not allowed to cover a poop with it, which was maybe tistayim. So we have shown that this is true. So that went. So we had from Eretz Yisrael. Some say it was Rava, Braid, Rav Yosef, Bar Chama, and Rav Zera. So Rava, it seems to be that we're saying that this Rava is the same as the other Rava. Okay. Rami Bereid Rav Yeva Amar, Rami the son of Rav Yeva says, Koi Hanu Taima Delo Machasinan. The reason that we don't cover the blood of the koi animal on Yantif is Gzera Mishum Atar Schalba. It's a decree because if we allow you to cover it, then people are going to think that the chalev, the certain fats that are on the liver, on the kidney, I forget exactly which ones, that's going to be mutter. Because if we say that this is a chaya, then you're allowed to eat the chalev, these certain fats of a chalev. So if the fact that we tell you, yes, it's a chaya in regard to covering the blood, you're going to make a mistake and eat the fats. But because it's a suffix, we don't know if this animal is a behema, you're not allowed to eat it. Because if it ends up that this animal is really a behema, you're not allowed to eat those fats. So you're going to make the wrong conclusion. You're going to think that it's considered a chaya for everything. So if so, we shouldn't let you you shouldn't allow you to cover the blood even on a weekday, because maybe someone who sees, oh, if you're covering this, it's a chaya and you're allowed to eat the fat. So the Gemara says no. No, on a regular weekday, if they see you that you shafted a koi, but then you're sprinkling dirt on it, you might say, "Oh, you found that your floor wasn't smooth, and you needed to add dirt to make your floor smooth." They don't realize that you're doing it because of a mitzvah. But if you're going to shaft it on Yantif, we know that you're not allowed to just put dirt. If there's a problem with your floor, you're not allowed to fix that on Yom Tov. So the only reason you're doing it is because of shechting a koi. The Gemara says, "Shachad ba'ashba mi'ikal meimar." What if you shechted it in? So the ashba usually means like a garbage dump, but for our purposes, it means it was some type of public property that wasn't yours. So if there was an unevenness in an ashba, now an ashba, so I guess you have to be careful here in regard to Bava Kama dinner. If there's a ditch and someone could fall in the ditch, that's considered bore. And that is and whoever makes a bore is liable if the bore is a proper size. Someone who falls in it or trips in it, or an animal, you're liable for causing damage. But if it's an ashba, that's not considered a public property. I mean, anyone has a right to go there, but people don't. But so if there was an unevenness in an ashba, it's not your responsibility or to smooth it out and to put dirt there. So if you shachted a koi on a weekday in an ashba, and people saw you putting dirt on it, they know that you're not putting dirt to smooth the floor, because it's no one's responsibility to smooth the floor in the ashba. So then they will conclude the reason that you're sprinkling dirt is because is because you shechted a koi, and a koi we clearly see because you're covering it, it must be a chaya, and then I'm going to eat the chaylev of a koi, forgetting that it's a suffix, and I have to treat it with all the stringencies of a chaya, so I have to cover its blood, but I also need the stringencies of behema. I'm not allowed to eat the chaylev because maybe it's a behema. So the Gemara says, Bali malach ma'ikal meimar. What if you come and ask a shaila? I'm going to shech the koi on a Tuesday. Do I need to cover the blood or not? If we're worried that if we give you a heter if we tell you to cover the blood, that people are going to use the fat, what should we say? So ella b'chol inami misafka. So in a weekday, or even though that a koi covering the blood is only because of a doubt, we don't know if it's a behema or a chaya. Ami l'Rabbanan zil trach v'chaseh. If you ask a shaila, the rabbis will tell you go and cover it. Trach literally means go through the trouble or the bother of covering. Then it means you have to, meaning even if it's not convenient, you have to cover it, the blood, when you shechted it on a weekday. The Yom Tov, but if you're shechting it on Yom Tov, if it's only a suffix, a doubt, if it needs to get covered, would the Chachamim say, go out of your way and make sure it gets covered? No. So Yantif is a bigger problem to cover it because people might come to the wrong conclusion. So on Yantif we wouldn't. Tani Rab Zera taught lo koi bavad amr. They didn't say this only in regard to the koi animal. El filo shachet behema chayiv of. Even if you shechted multiple animals, but at least one was a behema and at least one was a oaf. One was an animal that you didn't have to cover the blood, and one was an animal that you did, but you shechted it in the same place. So the bloods are now mixed together. What do you do? And the blood got mixed up. You're not allowed to cover it on Yom Tov because you're only allowed to cover something that's a vadai. And in this case, the blood got mixed up. I don't know which blood is the chicken blood and which blood is the goat blood. I'm Rabbi Yossi bar Yasaniya. Rav Yossi bar Yasaniya said, Lo shanu ela she'en yachal chasos b'tikira achas. Also, you're only allowed to cover it on Yantif if you're able to cover it with one movement of the spade, because the spade is already in the ground, and you have enough dirt from when you pull that out to cover it. That's when it's forbidden to shecht it on Yantif. But if you're able to cover the blood from the chaya or the oaf that you shechted with one movement of the spade, then you are allowed to cover it on Yom Tov. Pshita, that's a pretty straightforward thing. I didn't need him to teach us that. So the Gemara says, I might think that because to put it back in the second time would be usher, we might have think that the Chachamim said you're not allowed to even do the first one, lest you need to do a second one, which is definitely usher. I think we spoke about this, maybe it was before the Yom Tovin, but the idea of Gzera l'Gzera. Yeah, we spoke about it at the very beginning, I think. Trying to get the first shot in Mishnah. That the Chachamim don't make a Gzera. The Chachamim, we learned in Pirkei Avos, Asu Shagla Torah, make a fence around the Torah. But that's for something that needs a fence. If you already put a fence, you can't put a fence around a fence. And we kind of learned this. It's not the specific source, but it is an example of it. Of the snake and Chava. Hashem told Adam not to eat from this tree. But what did Chava tell the snake? Chava told the snake, we're not allowed to touch the tree. So the Medrash says, or the Gemara in Sanhedrin, I think, that so this Chava told the snake, I can't touch it. The snake knew that that's not what Hashem said, so he pushed her against the tree. She touched the tree, and he said, look, nothing happened. If you eat it, nothing's going to happen either. So sometimes if you make a decree in the wrong, or this actually, in my opinion, it fits more with the Rambam's opinion. We've mentioned that how can we make a gzera, though? The Torah says We can't add to the mitzvos or take away from the mitzvos. So the Rambam says when you add it, you have to make it clear that this is a rabbinic enactment. It's not the Torah doesn't say that you have to do this. We're making it so to strengthen the Torah law. So Adam didn't tell Chava that. If Adam was allowed to make the Xera, but to show we can't eat it, but we're not even going to touch it because if we touch it, we might pick the fruit and eat it. So I think it shows that the Rambam's opinion of how we can make Xera. It fits in well with that. Rabbi, this is at the very bottom of 8b3. Shachat tzibor me'erev Yom Tov. If you shechted a bird on Erev Yom Tov and you didn't cover the blood yet, ein mechasen oso b'Yom Tov, you're not allowed to cover that blood on Yom Tov. So you're allowed to shecht it on, cover it on Yom Tov if that's when you shechted it. But if you did it before, you should have covered it before. Okay, now there is a rush over here. The rush asks, why don't we let you shecht the koi anyway and cover the blood later? Who says you have to cover the blood right away? So he gives two answers. One is that you're not allowed to shecht into a kli. Now, I don't remember this halacha, but what it might be is you have to always let the blood go on the floor. Because when do you shecht and collect the blood? If it's a korban. And if we would shecht and collect the blood and keep it in a container to cover it later, it might look like we're making a korban outside the Beitza Mikdash. So we're not allowed to shecht it into a kli and then later after Yantav is over, cover it up. And you can't do it on the ground either because it's going to get absorbed in the ground and you won't know where it is by the end of Yantav, so you won't be able to cover it. Okay, so let's go to the next. Now test it out. So just like you're allowed to shacht on Yantav to have fresh meat, you're allowed to bake fresh bread on Yantav to have fresh bread. Now the problem is, well, not the problem, but baking involves several malachos. You're mixing the water and the flour together and kneading it, and so the mixing it is a problem. Kneading is a problem. Baking is normally a problem, but for Yantav it's okay.